The question, what's your greatest weakness, is the question we all dread in job interviews. Do we answer honestly and risk not getting hired? Or do we use one of those clever ways of turning a weakness into a strength? Like, I'm such a perfectionist, or I work too hard, or I care too much. The truth is, we spend most of our lives trying to hide our weaknesses, not just in job interviews, but in other areas as well. But what if we've been looking at weaknesses all wrong? What if our culture's obsession with strength and perfection is actually keeping us from experiencing something more meaningful? What if there's more to life than hiding our weaknesses? What if true strength is actually found precisely in those places where we feel most inadequate? Let's find out together right now on More to Life. Maybe you heard the story about the manager being interviewed for a new position. My department has turned a profit every quarter for the past 5 years, the candidate says. I've never had a personnel problem, and I've always gotten superior performance reviews. Very impressive, the interviewer replied. And what's your greatest weakness? He replied, I tend to exaggerate. We may chuckle, but it's true that revealing our weaknesses is one of the last things in the world we want to do. From a young age, we're taught that success means everything. We celebrate the athletes who never quit and the CEOs who never fail. Our cultural heroes are the ones who overcome every obstacle through sheer determination and grit. Children learn on playgrounds that the fastest and the strongest, they get picked first. They understand quickly that high achievers receive the most recognition. And so by adulthood, most of us have internalized the belief that our weaknesses are liabilities to be hidden, rather than potential for growth and connection. The underlying assumption is clear. Weakness is the enemy of success and must be eliminated. But what if this fundamental assumption is wrong? In his research on leadership, management expert Jim Collins discovered something surprising. The most effective leaders weren't necessarily the strongest, or the most charismatic, or most confident. Instead, they possessed what he calls a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. In other words, acknowledging limitations, even embracing them, was part of their success, not an obstacle to it. This paradox isn't new. Throughout history, some of the most influential people weren't those with the most impressive resumes, but those who turned their limitations into launching pads for greater success and impact. Consider some examples from the Bible. Moses, for example, had a speech impediment, yet became God's spokesperson. David was the youngest and smallest of his brothers, yet defeated a giant. The disciples were ordinary fishermen, yet changed the world. The Apostle Paul, who had what he called a thorn in the flesh, became Christianity's greatest missionary despite his limitations. This upside down approach to weakness challenges our cultural assumptions about strength and success. I mean, who are we kidding? We know we all have weaknesses. After all, we're only human. And while our instinct is to hide these weaknesses, what if acknowledging them actually unlocks greater meaning in our lives? Psychologists have found that vulnerability and willingness to acknowledge our weaknesses is actually the foundation of courage and meaningful connection with others. When we hide our limitations, we waste enormous energy keeping up appearances and miss opportunities for authentic relationships and growth. Think about it. The people who have most impacted your life probably weren't those who seemed perfect, but those who were real about their struggles and showed how to navigate them with grace. Today, we'll explore a counterintuitive truth found in the writings of Paul, one of history's most influential leaders who made this extraordinary claim. He says, "When I am weak, then I am strong." We'll unpack what he meant and how this principle might revolutionize your approach to the limitations you face. There's a profound power that comes when we discover what can happen if we embrace our weaknesses. Let's take a moment and examine one of the most puzzling passages in the Bible, found in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Here, the Apostle Paul is writing to a church that values strength, impressive speaking, and powerful spiritual experiences. They're questioning Paul's leadership because, frankly, his resume doesn't seem impressive enough. Paul had founded the church in Corinth, but now many were doubting his credentials as an apostle. He wasn't one of the original disciples who walked with Jesus. He wasn't as eloquent of a speaker as some of those teachers. He found himself in trouble just about everywhere he went. And in short, he wasn't the kind of leader the Corinthians wanted to be associated with. And so Paul here finds himself in the awkward position of defending his qualifications. But he does so in the most unexpected way. In the first part of chapter 12, Paul describes an extraordinary spiritual experience he had 14 years earlier, in which he was caught up into the third heaven and saw visions that were beyond description. The Corinthian church craved these kind of ecstatic spiritual experiences. Instead of boasting about his spiritual experiences, he chooses to boast about his weaknesses. Let's read what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. It says, "So, to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud." There's been a lot of speculation about what Paul means here by a thorn in the flesh. The word translated as thorn could just as accurately be translated as stake or even spear. This wasn't a minor annoyance or just a pain in the neck. It was something chronic, a chronic pain that significantly hindered his ability to serve Christ. Some scholars have suggested it was a spiritual weakness, maybe some kind of sin, maybe a nagging temptation, or even spiritual darkness. Others have proposed it was an emotional vulnerability, such as depression or anxiety. Most likely, given the use of the word flesh, it was some kind of physical disability. Perhaps poor eyesight, some have suggested. Maybe some sort of migraines, a speech impediment, or just a chronic illness. Whatever it was serious and became an unexpected roadblock for Paul in serving Christ. You know, some thorns are more painful than others, but here's the truth. We all deal with something. We've all got weaknesses of some form or another. According to Paul, these disabilities don't disqualify us. In fact, when we own our weaknesses, God can turn them into strengths. So when we face moments of weakness in our lives, what are our options? Looking at Paul's examples, we find three possible responses to the weaknesses in our lives. And here's number one. Number one is ask God to take the thorn away. Verse 8 tells us 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. Paul is not suggesting that we simply give in to our weaknesses without a fight. God created us to live abundantly. There was no sickness or death in God's original design. And when we encounter things that hurt us, like a thorn in the flesh, it's natural and right to push back against those things. That's what Paul did. He begged God 3 times to take away his thorn. He didn't enjoy being limited or in pain. And we should do the same thing. When people are sick, we should pray for healing. When people struggle with addictions, we should pray for their deliverance. When people have been wounded by life or circumstances, we need to pray for them, for their victory, for their recovery. Of course, we pray in submission to God's will, but let's not make the mistake of confusing submission for surrender to suffering. The second response to weakness is to accept God's sovereign will. In verse 9, we read God's response to Paul's pleading. Each time he said, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness." Sometimes God takes the thorn away, but sometimes in his wisdom, he doesn't. Back in verse 7, Paul tells us that God allowed the thorn for a purpose. He said, "So to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh." He also says it was a messenger of Satan who inflicted this thorn on him. Satan is the thief who wants to rob us of our health and strength. Yet at the same time that Satan delivered the thorn, God used the thorn that Satan inflicted in order to accomplish a greater purpose. In Paul's case, God allowed this thorn to protect him from pride. This in no way means that God is always the one who sends horrific experiences in people's lives just to teach them a lesson. But it does mean that God can use any situation, good or bad, for his ultimate purpose and will. As it says in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. This concept is sometimes difficult for us to fully understand in this life. But I love this quote from author Ellen White, who says, "God never leads his children otherwise than they would choose to be led if they could see the end from the beginning and discern the glory of the purpose which they are fulfilling as co-workers with him." There came a moment when Paul had to stop asking God to take the thorn away and accept that God was ultimately in control. There are echoes here of Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane. Jesus prayed 3 times for the Father to take away a far more horrific thorn than the one Paul had to deal with. But Jesus too accepted the sovereign will of his Father. He said, "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." The third response to weakness goes even further. It's to be thankful to God for the weakness. Look at verses 9 and 10. It says, "Each time he said, 'My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness.' So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong." This is perhaps the most counterintuitive response of all. Paul moved beyond merely accepting his weakness to actually celebrating it. He understood that his limitations created space for God's power to be displayed. The word grace in verse 9, where it says, "My grace is sufficient for you," is the Greek word charis. This word appears many times in the New Testament and is usually translated as grace, but occasionally it's translated differently. For example, in Luke chapter 6, verse 32, the same word is translated as benefit or thank, or even credit in some versions. So when God says, my grace is sufficient for you, it can also mean I'm giving you sufficient thankfulness. In other words, God gives us the ability to be thankful even in difficult circumstances. The Bible is filled with verses that call us to give thanks in difficult times. Here's some examples. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 and 18 says, always be joyful, never stop praying, be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4 tells us we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance, and endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. Evolution rewards the strong, the beautiful, the powerful. It's about the elimination of weakness. But Jesus Christ reverses this theory by teaching, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. These are the ones who will inherit the kingdom of heaven, who will be comforted, who will inherit the earth. Evolution rewards the proud. Jesus rewards the humble. Evolution notices only those who succeed. Jesus cares for the weak. Evolution doesn't care for you. Jesus died for you. And time after time in Scripture, you find the little guy beating the big guy. Moses walking into the court of the most powerful ruler with nothing but a staff. Gideon facing thousands of ruthless warriors with just 300 men. David going into battle against a giant with nothing more than a sling and a stone. Again and again, the little guy beats the big guy. Might and money, power and position means nothing. Why? Because those little guys served God, and God is bigger than everyone else. Paul's paradoxical claim, when I am weak, then I am strong, isn't a denial of reality. What it is, it's an invitation to experience a different kind of strength, one that doesn't come from self-sufficiency, but from allowing God's power to work through your limitations.
In a world filled with uncertainty, Hope Channel Canada is lighting the way. Through health, relationships, and the message of salvation, we're transforming lives across this beautiful country. I want to invite you to become an agent of hope. Through prayer, volunteering, or a generous donation, you can be part of this life-changing mission. Like stars in the sky, each one of us has a role to play in shining light to those in need. Just visit agentsofhope.ca or call 1-855-4-HOPE-TV to join us. And thank you for being an agent of hope.
So how can we apply this counterintuitive principle to our own lives? How do we move from hiding our weaknesses to embracing them as potential channels for God's power? Let me suggest 3 practical steps. Number 1, identify your thorns. Take an honest inventory of your limitations, your struggles, your challenges. What are the areas where you feel inadequate? What are the persistent struggles that you've tried to overcome but still remain? What aspects of your life make you feel vulnerable or ashamed? This isn't about wallowing in self-pity or making excuses. It's about honest self-awareness. Paul didn't pretend his thorn didn't exist. He acknowledged it plainly. Maybe your thorn is physical, a chronic illness, a disability, or a limitation that affects your daily life. But maybe it's emotional, like anxiety, depression, or some sort of past trauma that continues to impact you today. Or maybe it's relational, like difficulty connecting with others, or patterns of conflict that can't seem to just go away. Maybe it's professional skills you lack, or challenges that seem to follow you from job to job to job. Whatever your thorns are, naming them is the first step toward discovering how God might use them. Take some time this week to reflect about your areas of weakness. Ask trusted friends for their insights as well. Sometimes others can see our blind spots, the ones that we often miss. Number 2, reframe your perspective on weakness. Our culture views weakness as failure, but God views it as opportunity. One of the most transformative practices is to begin seeing your limitations through God's eyes. Ask yourself these questions about your specific weaknesses. How might this limitation keep me humble and dependent on God? What has this struggle taught me that I couldn't have learned otherwise? How has this weakness made me more compassionate toward others? And in what ways has God showed me his faithfulness through this challenge? When Paul received God's response about his thorn, "My grace is sufficient for you," he gained a new perspective. Instead of seeing his weakness as a hindrance to ministry, he began to see it as the very means through which God's power would be displayed. Number 3, find purpose in your limitations. Your weaknesses aren't accidents. They can become avenues for ministry and impact. Think about how your particular struggles might equip you to serve others in unique ways. Don't feel like the only way to help others is by sharing your success stories with them. Sometimes your most powerful teaching moments come from sharing about the scars. People who have faced depression often become the most compassionate listeners for others in similar pain. Those who have struggled with addiction can become the most effective guides for those seeking recovery. Parents who have navigated the challenges of raising children with special needs become invaluable resources for other families beginning that same journey. Your thorn may be precisely the qualifications you need for your most important work. And so this week, I challenge you to take one tangible step towards embracing weakness as a channel for God's strength. Share one of your struggles with a trusted friend. Talking about it with someone can really make a difference. Or maybe offer support to someone facing a challenge similar to the one you've experienced. In prayer, deliberately thank God for one way your limitations have deepened your dependence on Him. Resist the urge to present a perfect image on social media. Share something authentic once in a while instead. Remember, this isn't about manufacturing humility or pretending to be less than you are. It's about redirecting your focus from building your own strength to creating space for God's power to work through you. As you apply these reflections this week, I'd love to hear how this has impacted your understanding of weakness and strength. Follow More to Life on social media, where you can share your experiences and insights and find encouragement for your journey ahead.
Who is Jesus of Nazareth? Was he truly God, as Christians say he is? And why did Jesus come to earth to die? And how does his death offer us salvation? What happens when I die? Is there really a heaven or hell? These questions and others we answer on our online Bible study platform at hopestudy.ca. There, you will find answers to these and other life-changing questions. If you have any questions, please email us at hopestudy@hopetv.ca. God bless you. See you there.
Let's return to where we started, that dreaded job interview question. What is your greatest weakness? Now imagine if instead of giving the expected answers designed to impress, someone responded with genuine self-awareness. Listen, I struggle with anxiety, but it's taught me to be more empathetic toward others facing similar challenges. Or what if a leader in a board meeting admitted, listen, I don't have all the answers here. I need your help with this decision. What if parents were honest with their children about their mistakes instead of pretending to be perfect? What might happen if we stopped exhausting ourselves by maintaining the facade of strength and instead embraced this paradoxical power of acknowledged weaknesses? Throughout history, the most transformative movements weren't led by those who were perfect and had the most amazing resumes. It was by those who understood their limitations and relied on a power beyond themselves. Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison, emerged not bitter, but more compassionate. His imprisonment, which was his thorn, became the very thing that gave moral authority to his leadership. Mother Teresa, a tiny Albanian nun with very few resources, embraced poverty as her strength, not her limitation. By identifying with the weakest members of society, she unleashed a worldwide movement of compassion. And consider Jesus himself. He could have come as a conquering king, displaying power through military might and political authority. Instead, he chose the path of vulnerability, born in poverty, living as a refugee, dying on a cross. His seeming defeat became the very means of salvation. His weakness, willingly embraced, became the channel for divine power to flow into human history. The paradox of strength through weakness isn't just a nice spiritual theory. It's the pattern we see in the lives of history's most transformative figures. So, what might this mean for your life? Perhaps it means finally seeking help for that struggle you've been hiding. Perhaps it means sharing your story of failure so others know they're not alone. Perhaps it means accepting a limitation you've been fighting against and asking what purpose this might have in my life. Diplomat and political scientist Henry Kissinger once wrote, "The great illusion of leadership is to think that man can be led out of the desert by someone who has never been there." Your desert experience, your thorn, may be precisely what qualifies you to lead others to water. Today, I invite you to embrace a revolutionary truth, that there's more to life than projecting strength. There's the profound power that comes when we acknowledge our weaknesses and allow God's strength to work through them. As Paul discovered, when I am weak, then I am strong. May you discover that same paradoxical strength in the very places where you feel most inadequate.